To understand a confrontation between Aurangzeb and Sambhaji, you first need to understand what Aurangzeb was actually trying to achieve. Because killing Sambhaji immediately, while emotionally satisfying after 7 years of frustration, was not the most strategically valuable option available to him. A dead Sambhaji was a martyr, a symbol, something the Maratha resistance could rally around indefinitely. The fallen king whose memory burned brighter than any living leader could. History is full of examples of what happens when empires kill their most defiant enemies too quickly. They create legends. They create causes. They create the kind of story that sustains resistance for generations. Aurangzeb was too politically sophisticated to make that mistake. What he needed was something far more valuable than a corpse. He needed a conversion, a public, visible, undeniable submission. Sambhaji Maharaj renouncing his faith, acknowledging Mughal supremacy, revealing the locations of Maratha treasuries and the names of key commanders. That would do what 7 years of military campaigning had failed to accomplish. It would demoralize the Maratha resistance completely. It would validate everything Aurangzeb believed about the inevitable triumph of his empire and his faith. It would be the definitive, unambiguous end of the war. So the offer was made. Convert, submit, cooperate, live. Picture this. The most powerful emperor in the world, 70 years old, 7 years away from his capital, 7 years of the most expensive military campaign in Mughal history, and across a stone floor in chains, wearing a jester's costume designed to strip him of every last shred of dignity. Sambhaji Maharaj, looking at Aurangzeb with an expression that no amount of chains, no degrading costume, no display of imperial power could touch. Not rage, not fear, not defeat. Something that unsettled Aurangzeb far more deeply than any of those things. Absolute, complete, total indifference. Aurangzeb had spent 7 years and the resources of an empire to get to this moment, and the man sitting in chains before him was making it very clear, without saying a single word, that none of it meant anything to him. The emperor had his prisoner. What he did not have and desperately needed was a broken man. This is the story of what happened next. Sambhaji's response was immediate. No, not a negotiation, not a request for better terms, not a moment of visible hesitation or calculation. No, Aurangzeb's advisors pressed him to reconsider. The practical arguments were overwhelming. His kingdom was under occupation. His commanders were leaderless. His family was vulnerable. His son Shah was a child who would grow up without a father. Every rational calculation pointed toward cooperation as the only survivable path. The answer did not change. Aurangzeb tried again. The terms were made more generous. A comfortable life, a position of honor within the Mughal court, his family protected, his son's future secured. No, the emperor, who had never in his adult life encountered a refusal he couldn't eventually overcome through sufficient pressure, sufficient incentive, or sufficient force, was beginning to understand that he was dealing with something genuinely different. Sambhaji was not calculating the odds and finding them unfavorable. He was not waiting for a better offer. He was not performing defiance for an audience. He had simply, completely, finally, with absolute clarity, decided who he was, and no offer Aurangzeb could make was capable of changing that. What followed was weeks of escalating pressure, of attempts to find the breaking point that every man supposedly has, of advisors and intermediaries sent to reason with him, to appeal to his survival instinct, to find a crack in the wall. There was no crack. Sambhaji was not alone in his refusal. Kavi, Kailash, the scholar, the poet, the man who had been Sambhaji's closest companion through everything, was given the same offer. Convert, submit, cooperate, live. His answer was the same as Sambhaji's. No. Think about what that means for a moment. Kavi Kailash was not a king. He had no throne to defend, no dynasty to protect, no political identity that required him to resist. He was a scholar, a man whose entire life had been built around the life of the mind, around intellectual exchange, around the joy of ideas. He could have argued convincingly to himself and the others that survival was a rational choice, that a living scholar preserves more than a dead one, that his resistance served no practical purpose. He didn't make that argument. Instead, he stood beside his king, in chains, in a foreign court, facing the same impossible choice, and gave the same answer. The brotherhood that had defined Sambhaji's reign was not broken by capture. It was not broken by chains. It was not broken by the full weight of Mughal imperial pressure. It held, completely, to the end. That fact alone, two men, in the worst possible circumstances, choosing the same impossible path together, says more about who Sambhaji Maharaj was than any battle he ever won. There is something historically extraordinary about the dynamic between Aurangzeb and Sambhaji during these weeks of captivity that rarely gets the attention it deserves. Aurangzeb was, by any measure, one of the most formidable personalities of the 17th century. Deeply intelligent, absolutely certain of his divine mandate, possessed of a will that had bent kingdoms, broken alliances, and sustained a military campaign for 7 years through sheer force of personal determination. He had broken men before, stronger men, arguably, in terms of political power and military resources. The Deccan sultans, rival princes, generals who had defied him. None of them had lasted as long as Sambhaji did in that room. Because what Sambhaji had, and what Aurangzeb's entire arsenal of pressure, incentive, and threat could not touch, was something that exists outside the reach of imperial power. He had already decided, completely, irrevocably. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from making a decision so total that nothing can change it. A paradoxical freedom. The freedom of a man in chains who has already accepted what is coming and found. In that acceptance, something that no emperor can take from him. Aurangzeb kept applying pressure because he couldn't conceive of a human being who wouldn't eventually break under sufficient force. His entire understanding of power was built on the assumption that every man has a price, a threshold beyond which cooperation becomes the only rational choice. Sambhaji was showing him, day by day, that assumption was wrong. And that realization, that this prison was not going to give him what he needed, was beginning to shift Aurangzeb's options from persuasion to something far darker. If you're finding this story as incredible as I do, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. This series is just getting started. When persuasion fails completely, when every offer has been rejected, every pressure applied, every rational argument exhausted, an emperor has two remaining options: release the prisoner, which is politically impossible, or make an example of him. Aurangzeb chose the second option, and the method he chose was designed not just to punish Sambhaji, but to send a message so clear, so brutal, so impossible to ignore that every Maratha soldier still holding a fort, every commander still fighting, every person who believed in the cause would understand exactly what continued resistance costs. What followed in the weeks after Sambhaji's final refusal is documented in both Mughal and Maratha historical sources. The accounts agree on essential facts even when they differ in specific details. It was systematic, prolonged, designed with a specific intention of breaking a man who had refused to be broken by any other means. Sambhaji endured it, all of it, without giving Aurangzeb what he came for. Not a conversion, not a submission, not a single name, not a single location, not one piece of information that would have made any practical difference to the Mughal campaign. Nothing. The man who had been called reckless, impulsive, and ungovernable as a young prince, the rebel who had affected the Mughals in a moment of rage, who had clashed with his father's advisors, who had taken the throne by force, had become, in the worst possible circumstances, something that nobody who had underestimated him could have predicted: unbreakable. Sambhaji Maharaj was executed on March 11, 1689. The manner of his death, which Mughal sources record with matter-of-factness that makes it more disturbing, not less, was designed to be a final act of humiliation, a demonstration that the empire's power was absolute and its patience with defiance was exhausted. It achieved the opposite of its intended effect. The news of how Sambhaji had died, not just that he had been executed, but how he conducted himself through everything that preceded it, spread to the Maratha kingdom with a speed and impact that no military victory could have matched. He had been offered everything. He had refused everything. He had endured everything. And he had not broken. That story, that specific documented, Historically verifiable story of a man who chose death over surrender with complete clarity and zero hesitation. Did not demoralize the Maratha resistance. It electrified it. The commanders who had been wavering found their resolve. The soldiers who had been exhausted found new purpose. The kingdom that Aurangzeb had expected collapsed without its king instead hardened into something more determined, more unified, and ultimately more dangerous than it had been before. Aurangzeb would spend another 18 years in the Deccan after Sambhaji's death. 18 more years of grinding, expensive, inconclusive warfare against the Maratha resistance that his execution of their king had made more resilient, not less. He never achieved the decisive victory he had come south to claim. He died in the Deccan in 1707, 18 years after Sambhaji, still fighting, still unable to finish what he had started. And the Maratha kingdom that he had tried to destroy survived him, grew after him, eventually became, under Sambhaji's own grandson, one of the dominant powers of the Indian subcontinent. Aurangzeb's empire did not outlast the man he had tried to break. Sambhaji's legacy did. Sambhaji Maharaj was 31 years old when he died. He had been king for 9 years. He had fought the largest army in the world for every single one of those 9 years. He had never surrendered a single fort that mattered. He had never broken under pressure that would have broken almost any other man. He left behind a son, Shahu, who would eventually become Chhatrapati and continue the dynasty his grandfather had founded and his father had defended with his life. He left behind a kingdom that outlasted the empire that killed him. And he left behind something harder to measure, but more enduring than either of those things. The proof that there are things worth dying for. And the demonstration, clear, documented, historically verifiable, that a human being can face the worst that power can do and remain completely and finally themselves. That is why, more than 300 years later, his name is still spoken with reverence across Maharashtra. That is why the series exists. Sambhaji Maharaj, the warrior who never broke. If this series moved you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every single one of those likes tells me to keep going. Thank you for watching.